This video is going to be my wrap-up for the month of September. Now, originally I was going to combine the months of September and October into one wrap-up video because I thought I hadn't read that much, and then it turns out that I actually kind of did, sort of, and apparently I had more to say about what I read than I thought I would. So, this is future Byron, although you kind of can't tell, coming in to tell you that this is just the September wrap-up. You can stay tuned, although that's not really a phrase that makes sense anymore, for the October wrap-up, which will be on Wednesday. Hello everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. Welcome back to me too. I am finally making this video after finally getting home. I will never trust Apple Maps again, but that's a story for a different time. In the month of September, I only read, let's see, I read 5 books. So I read 5 books in October. That's actually not as bad as I thought. So in September, I read 5 books. First book I read is a book that I'd had for a long time, and this is actually on my sadly neglected Read Harder Reading Challenge list, and that is The Red Tree by Caitlin R. Kiernan, or it might be actually Kathleen R. Kiernan. Now, this is basically a book about a woman who is a writer who is behind on her deadline, staying in a creepy old haunted house, working supposedly on her manuscript. But she's having a problem with her drinking, and she has a lot of grief in her past over a failed prior relationship with another woman. So this is a queer character in the protagonist spot in this book, which is really, really awesome. Basically, this book is so just creepy and weird and kind of meta. So this, basically what you're reading when you read this book in an epistolary format is a bunch of journal entries which were after the fact turned into a book that was published. So basically you're reading an unfinished/finished and published manuscript written by this famous author who sort of loses her mind a little bit while she's living in this house. And the reason I call it meta is that not only is it an unfinished manuscript, but within her unfinished manuscript, she cites and excerpts another unfinished manuscript that she finds in the basement from the previous person who rented the house. And in his manuscript, he cites and excerpts information from other sources, so it's very confusing. And what this all does is it creates this sort of nesting doll effect of unreliable narration. Now, she drinks too much, and she's emotionally unwell, and she's unraveling a little bit, and he was starting to unravel a little bit while he was writing, and a lot of his sources are ancient, so he can't 100% trust all of them. So you're reading all of this information, some secondhand, some third-hand, some like fourth-hand, about this house and about this tree that is on the property, this huge, huge tree, and what it was there for, and what the stone structure that is sunken into the ground in front of the tree is really for. And there's lots of lore in the town where the house exists about the house and about the tree. And she's fascinated as he was fascinated. And we are fascinated by their fascination. It's fascinating. You don't know what to believe. It just casts doubt on everything. And I thought it was a really clever take on the unreliable narrator thing. As a result, the whole read was very unsettling. I didn't know who to believe. And sometimes I couldn't remember sometimes who I was reading, whether I was reading the main character or I was reading the manuscript that she was reading. It was really, really clever and worked like gangbusters. I thought it was super spooky. The book paints a really fascinating picture of her prior relationship, and it has a lot of psychological depth, and it's really moving. The book is just this cloudy, nebulous, unsettling, strange story. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed a weird, like almost with a capital W, like new weird, disturbing, spiral into madness story as much as I enjoyed this one. The only thing I would say against The Red Tree, so this is the cover that the publisher is currently using, which I think is fine, but it's a little, I don't know, cliche. It looks like a romance novel a little bit. It just looks like the wrong genre to me. The book deserves a different cover. There is another version which looks like this, which is, of course, a little bit better. And if you've read the book, you know that it's more appropriate. I don't remember where this came from. I don't know if the author was sending this to people or where this came from. I like this version better. But basically, that's not really a complaint about the book. I'm sort of kidding. The only complaint I have about the book really is that sometimes the lengthy excerpts from the manuscript that she's reading became a little tedious because it's a different style of writing, of course, which is a tribute to the author's ability to write in that style. But it did get a little tedious, and so there were parts of the book that dragged a little bit, but only a couple of times. And overall, I really, really was impressed by this author. I can't wait to read more of her work. I gave this book 4 stars, but I think now that I know what to expect, if I reread it, which I will one day, the excerpts might not be as tedious to me, and it could easily be 5 stars because I just think it's honestly a brilliant book. I would recommend this book to anybody who is up for something spooky, disturbing, and odd. The next book that I read was Sing Unburied, Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This was my first read for Contemporary-a-thon. Now, everybody's heard of this book. It's the recipient of the National Book Award in 2017. This is basically about a drug-addicted young mother and her son who lives in relative poverty with her parents. And her mother, his grandmother, is very unwell and bedridden. The boy's father has been in prison for a long time, and he's getting out. So within the events of the story, they go to get him out of prison, and they take a road trip with the baby, the boy's younger sister, and all kinds of like very gritty, upsetting, not great things happen along the way. This book deals a lot with her drug addiction and that whole culture and what it does to people. It deals a lot with the family. And this is where the magical realism aspect of this book comes in. Everyone in the family has some kind of special mental or spiritual power. Jojo is able to feel and hear and understand the feelings and the wants and the needs of living things around him, like animals and plants. And it all weaves together in a really beautiful way. At times this is a difficult read, especially if you know anyone or you yourself have ever suffered from any kind of addiction, because it paints a very bleak picture of that. But this book also gives us really rich, detailed backstories and histories for these characters. I could see this book, I could feel this book while I was reading it. I tore through it. I read it very, very quickly. I gave it 5 stars. It deserves all the accolades it's gotten. It is dark and it is spiritual and has a little bit of a supernatural element. And yes, it does. It is sad, but at the same time, it's so beautiful. I recommend it anyway. I think it's wonderful. If you're used to reading stuff like this, it's probably not going to really faze you. And it is a book that will stick with you. I will remember this book for a very long time. The next book I read was my second read for Contemporary-a-thon, and that was Digging In by Loretta Nyhan. Now, this book surprised me. This is a contemporary. This is about a woman who has lost her husband. He has passed away. She's a widower. And she's raising a teenage son. And she's starting to go through this very difficult trial at work because her boss, who is also sort of a fatherly figure for her, has passed away as well. And his son, who is sort of like this like new age, read too many how to get the most out of your employees, like yuppie kid, has taken over the business and thrown out all of his time-honored ways of doing things, redesigned the office, and pitted all of the employees against each other, and has told them that he's going to fire 2 people at the end of a certain period of time, and they all have to compete to keep their jobs, basically. There are really interesting and complex female relationships, friendships in this book. I really liked the way the author depicted the relationship between this mother and her son, who, their relationship is a bit fraught because the husband is gone and she's sort of struggling to get her life together. And then that's where the point of the book comes in, which is that in a fit of just defiance and in like a desire to exert some control and power over her life, she digs up her backyard because her yard looks terrible and she's got like dandelions growing out that her neighbor very happily points out to her. And she starts just planting vegetables because she befriends this woman at the farmer's market and she decides, sure, I'll plant vegetables here. The HOA is furious. Her neighbor is annoyed with her, but her relationship with the neighbor, this older curmudgeonly man, develops over time and is really interesting. And, you can imagine, it's a story of self-empowerment. It's very inspiring and it's funny, but it was very unexpectedly moving to me. I cried a couple of times when I was reading this book. I just think it's really well written. It sounds just cute, and it's more than just cute. It really snuck up on me, and I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars, and I was not expecting that to happen. I've had it for a long time, and I'm so glad I finally read it. So I really recommend it. Digging In is, I wouldn't call it hard-hitting, but it's a surprisingly deep and moving and heartfelt book. The only thing I would ding it for is that towards the end, I think some of the antics at work in her workplace become a little bit edging on farcical, to the point where I was sort of less invested because I didn't really believe what was going on. But that's a minor gripe. I really enjoyed this book, and I recommend it. The next book I read was in the middle of Contemporary-a-thon, but it was not for Contemporary-a-thon, and that was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. Now, a lot of people have been reading this book. It is, I guess you would say, YA fantasy. It's like a portal fantasy, if you want to put a big fat label on it. It's also a story about race and class and freedom and lots of things. I read a short story by Alix E. Harrow on Tor.com called The Autobiography of a Traitor and a Half Savage. And it was, I thought, the most genius, brilliant, just awe-inspiring allegory for the white settlers coming to the New World and appropriating the land and freezing and destroying the culture that they found here. And it was so brilliant. And when I saw that Alix E. Harrow had a novel coming out, I pre-ordered it immediately. And that is this novel. It's nothing like that short story, but I really enjoyed it. It's a vision of Earth where there are doors, which are portals to other worlds, scattered throughout the world, and there's this nefarious force of people trying to close them. It's a sweeping, lifelong love story, and it features a young female protagonist. Now, she's very brave, and she's very cool. I would say she's maybe a little bit bland in terms of just being really brave and really inventive and cool. However, I enjoyed reading her, and I really like the fact that she basically has been raised by this very wealthy man as, in some ways, kind of a token part of his collection. He's a man who collects exotic artifacts from around the world. He has Egyptian artifacts and curiosities and such, and he's been raising her as his ward, and she sort of is just part of his collection in a way. He's sometimes tender with her, but he doesn't really love her, it seems. She's comfortable with him, but she never gets to see her actual father, who works for him because he's traveling the world helping to find these curiosities for his collection. I thought this book had a lot to say about the real meaning of freedom and the difference between being truly free to pursue what you want to pursue, to be with who you want to be, to do what you want to do, to be able to move, to have mobility in society, to be with your family. And in this book, literally the freedom to pass through doorways to go to other worlds, it's all being threatened in this book. So I thought it had a lot to say about that. I thought it had a lot to say about race and the sort of Western obsession with quote-unquote exotic curiosities, which sort of masquerades as compassion and true interest in other people's cultures, but which many times is really just appropriation, which in this book, it literally is appropriation. It's also a really interesting take on the story within a story trope, and I won't go any farther than that, but there is a book that this main character finds and begins to read, and you read the story as she's reading it, and the way that is handled and how it impacts her story, I thought was very clever and was unexpected. That said, this book was 4 stars for me, not 5. I expected it to maybe be 5. The book was a coming-of-age story, it was a love story, it was an action-adventure story, it was a mystery, it was kind of trying to do a lot of things at the same time. I feel like maybe it could have been a little bit longer if it wanted to accomplish all of those things in a really, thorough way enough for it to breathe. I sort of felt like it was trying to do too much for me. And I also I liked the main character, but she wasn't super memorable for me. I don't think she ever gelled for me exactly. So I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. I think it could have been more, but I really enjoyed it. I recommend it. I don't usually read fantasy, but I'm really glad I read this one, and I will definitely be reading more by Alix E. Harrow. So after the 10,000 Doors of January, I finally returned to my Contemporary-a-thon reads, because at first in Contemporary-a-thon, I really got ahead of schedule. If you saw my vlog, you saw this, and then I got very sidetracked. So I finished reading that book because I had started it and stopped it, and I didn't want to have to start over. So then eventually I got back to my Contemporary-a-thon reads, and the third book I read for Contemporary-a-thon was a nonfiction memoir called Daring to Drive by Manal al-Sharif. Now this book tells the true story of a woman living in Saudi Arabia who challenged all of the social norms and the expectations and the rules of the religious police, and challenged the rule that says that women do not drive. Women have to be accompanied everywhere by a male of her family, someone with whom she is not involved or could not be involved with. It is either going to be her spouse, her husband, or like a brother or a father type thing. So they can't drive themselves anywhere. They have to be accompanied. Sometimes they can't get a taxi because they're able to get taxis, but if they can't get a taxi somewhere, then they can't get home from wherever they are, or they can't do what they need to do, and it can be infuriating. And then if they walk home, they are, yelled at and catcalled and called terrible things, and it's just like this horribly unjust situation. So she got really tired of this and created a group of women who wanted to challenge the rule, and they were all going to drive, and she's arrested, and she goes to prison, and it's horrific. And this is all a true story. And basically, at the end of the day, I don't know much about this culture. I am not from the religion, and I'm not going to judge someone else's religion as a admittedly privileged white gay man in the United States. However, I will say that reading her depiction of what it's like to live in that world was eye-opening and horrifying and infuriating, frustrating, and her story is very inspiring. I read it very quickly. It was a page-turner, which I was not expecting. I guess I just thought, because it was nonfiction, that I would be bored, which is shame on me. But it was great. It was really, really, really eye-opening. So I recommend it. I didn't know anything about this culture at all. I don't know anything about Saudi women and how they're treated, and now I know a little bit more. It was very interesting. It was very impactful. I will not forget it, and I recommend it. I gave this book also 4 stars. Lots of 4-star reads in the last couple months. So then that was the end of my contemporary-a-thon, and that was also my last read in September. So that is my September wrap-up. Thank you for watching this video. In a couple of days, on Wednesday, I'm going to be posting my October wrap-up to finish the wrap-up joyousness that's happening. And I hope you will also come back to watch that video. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit that thumbs up button. I appreciate that a lot. If you love this video and you'd like to see more like this, you can always subscribe to my channel. I appreciate that even more. And if you have comments, as always, the comment box below is your friend for book suggestions. If you want to tell me I'm a moron or anything like that. And until next time, which will be Wednesday, I will be here in the dark reading.